Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Thursday, March 14th, Town of Penfield Planning Board hearing. We have before us this evening two things on our agenda, a preliminary final and a sketch. We'll listen to the applicant, we'll have questions from the board, and then we'll accept questions from the audience. Following the public hearing, we'll deliberate in the back of the auditorium all matters before us. Should you have any questions, please contact the planning office tomorrow. We're ready to go.
Application number 1, Jared Lusk, Nixon Peabody LLP, 1300 Clinton Square, Rochester, New York, 14604, on behalf of Bell Atlantic Mobile of Rochester LP, DBA Verizon Wireless. Request under Articles 9-9-2 and 11-11-7 of the Code preliminary and final site plan and special permit approval to allow the construction of a 120-foot plus or minus tower, telecommunications facility, and other associated improvements on 2.29 acres located at 1843 Empire Boulevard, to be known as 1843 Empire Boulevard. The property is now or formerly owned by Jeffrey C. Rydell and its own general business. Application number 13P-0010, SBL number 093.15-1-63.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you all. My name is Ashley Champion. I'm an attorney with Nixon Peabody here on behalf of Verizon Wireless. And joining me tonight are some other members of the Verizon Wireless team, Kathy Pomponio, Brett Morgan, and our RF engineer, Peter Franz, in case you have any questions that get too technical for me. So Verizon is before the board tonight, as you're aware, for its application for a special permit, site plan approval, and also a setback waiver to install and operate a wireless telecommunications facility on property owned by Jeffrey Rydell at 1843 Empire Boulevard in the town. As you're aware, Verizon is a public utility and they're licensed by the FCC to provide their wireless telecommunications coverage in the region, including in the town of Penfield. And Verizon is currently experiencing a gap in its PCS in-building coverage in the North Penfield Crossroads area of the town along the Empire Boulevard corridor. And that gap in coverage can be seen on this plot right here. Purple is existing coverage and the white is the area that we're looking to fill. These plots are also in the Exhibit F tab of your application if you want to follow along with that. So the objective here is to provide adequate PCS in-building coverage and also to provide LTE service, which is more commonly known as the 4G LTE. I'm sure you've all heard of it on commercials and whatnot, to this site. And the objective when addressing this gap in coverage is to try to locate a site as close to the center of the gap as possible. This provides better in-building coverage to the intended areas, which are here, the commercial developments all along the Empire Boulevard corridor. And it also prevents against interference with other sites if you're located too close in either direction, and other clutter areas from different development that's already located there. Okay, so here, and another interesting thing about the PCS sites, I know that we were talking a little bit about, I overheard Mark talking to you about some possible alternative locations, but an interesting thing about the PCS sites is that their coverage area is really fairly small. It's a fairly small footprint. So each site only covers approximately a mile radius. So moving a site, just a half a mile to the north or south or east or west can really create a significant difference in the amount of coverage that's provided from that site. So once this gap was zeroed in on by the RF engineers, there was a site selection process that was undergone by Brett Morgan and his company, where they looked at over 35 different parcels in this immediate area to see how they would work from a technological perspective and also a land use perspective for the possible location of this facility. Those 35 sites included both the Charlie's Restaurant site, which we are applying for tonight, and the flagpole site that you were all discussing a bit during your meeting. And Following on the PRC's request, we submitted on March 12th some more detailed information that Mark was going over. And if you'd like, we can turn to that. And I know that Mark pulled it up during your work session, but you can see that the coverage that's provided by that existing flagpole site it's much more it's deficient when compared to the coverage that would be provided here, shown in green, by the proposed Charlie's Restaurant site. And that is for several reasons. Mark touched on them. The main reason is that the only available space within that existing flagpole site is at 46 feet antenna center line, which isn't nearly high enough to provide the coverage that we're looking to in this area. In addition, because of the way that flagpole sites are, we can't fit all of the antennas that we need to. So that's another issue, and also the ground area for the equipment. So after looking at all of those 35 sites, it was determined that the proposed site provided the coverage that was needed to fill that gap. It was also deemed to be a good site from a land use perspective. It's to be located in the back parking lot area. Here's a color rendering showing this is the existing over to the west. Also, another interesting thing about this site is that the grade slightly declines as you go towards the site compound. So in addition to the natural buffer that's provided by the existing trees, there's natural screening that takes place because of the decline in the grade. So I can answer any questions that you have at this point about either our March 12th follow-up submission to the PRC comments or the site, the project in general.
Anybody on the board?
Good evening.
Aye,
So you looked at 35 sites.
that's correct.
So the PRC gave you some comments back regarding the requirements for co-location study.
Mm-hmm.
You gave us a response, and I just want to get clarification from you. Did you only look at your own towers, or did you look at all available
Yes,
opportunities for mounting antennas on existing towers?
absolutely. The company fully investigated any opportunity to, looking on our own tower wouldn't be helpful because we would already be there. So that wouldn't provide us any new coverage if, because we're already at our towers. So all of the sites that we looked at were non-Verizon Wireless facilities, either raw land sites, existing towers, including an existing like the flagpole site, which is a stealth tower design. Yes.
I'm just curious, because I don't know that much about this stuff. But how come, like, you get a couple of those white dots in there, and then but there's some green outside, like beyond that point?
Mm-hmm.
What are those blackout areas that don't get covered?
They're not blackout areas. This is showing what the coverage is, the reliable coverage at a neg 78 dBm, which is Verizon standard for in-building coverage. So in these areas where you see white, it doesn't mean that there's no coverage. It just may mean that the standard may not be quite up to that in-building coverage. Not that you wouldn't, if you were on the road or even inside of a building, potentially receive some coverage. It just may not be to that level, and that can be caused by all sorts of things. It can be caused by interference from trees or buildings or other development that all can interfere with a cell signal. So it varies by the topography, but that doesn't necessarily mean where you see a white spot that there's going to be no coverage there. It just means that it's not quite up to that exact standard. Yes.
Made a comment about the fall zone for the tower.
Yes.
And the fall zone was 1/3 the height of the tower.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a history of monopoles falling?
I think it's a very rare occurrence. I don't know of any I don't know of any Verizon issues or of any monopoles recently that have had that issue. But that is a good point. I'm glad that you brought it up, because that is a waiver that we're requesting from the planning board. Your code requires a fall zone of 200 feet or the height of the tower, whichever is greater. But within that requirement, it's a specific carve-out that this board can grant a waiver if the applicant comes forward with evidence that the tower will fall within a smaller area. And we provided with our initial submission, which was part of Exhibit P, a letter from our tower engineers, a certified stamped letter saying that the fall zone of this tower is 40 feet. So we'd fall within the parcel, within the parcel bounds. We wouldn't hit the property line. So that's the waiver that we're requesting.
So if the board were to consider that request favorably, would Verizon be willing to provide a little bit of seeking a setback for the same distance that you're saying your fall zone is for the tower
Yes.
without any buffer?
Well, there's an additional 1 foot. It's 41 feet from the tower to the property line, and it's a 40-foot fall zone. But again, I mean, keep in mind, it's not, we're well beyond 40 feet from any sort of development. What we're abutting here is trees, and we're, well, over 200 feet, from the restaurant. We're almost 100 feet from the parking lot, from the pavement. So there's quite a bit more distance. The way that your code is written, it doesn't just apply to a structure being there. It's a property line. So
Right.
that's
And-
sometimes.
And of course, you're looking at existing conditions, and we're looking at the
Yes.
future. So, again, if you could just answer my question, would they be willing to consider a little bit of a buffer in addition to the 1 foot, like a 10-foot buffer? Or?
The area where we're showing the development is where the current lease parcel is, so that's where we're legally permitted to be. We can't really shift the compound to a different area, and pulling it forward, you'd be pulling it closer to existing development, closer to the parking lot, and closer to the existing restaurant, closer to Empire Boulevard.
That's not where you're tight, right?
I don't know what you mean.
That's not where you're tight. We're talking about a setback to the rear.
Right. So I guess I don't understand what you're asking. If we could pull everything forward towards the parking lot? I mean, we have a specific lease area that we're permitted to be in, and that's what's shown here.
Just for a point of clarification, the waiver, the request for a variance to the setback as well as the 200-foot fall zone is pending before the zoning board, not the planning board. And that meeting will be next week, I believe, next Thursday. So this board doesn't have jurisdiction to grant that waiver.
They actually can. They can't grant a waiver for the buffer, for the 100-foot buffer. That is something that we definitely need a variance for. But I can point you to the section of your code, and we called it out in our cover letter. If you just give me 1 second. It's 11-7-8E2.
So I thought I saw that in the zoning board application.
And yeah, we did apply in the event that this board doesn't grant a waiver.
Okay.
Our secondary option would be to seek a variance from that requirement. So that's probably why you saw it there too. We wanted to cover all of our bases on that. Yeah, so I can just read, just so you're all aware of this provision. It's that all appurtenances and attachments must be located a minimum setback from any property line, which, again, not structures, they just want you that far from a property line. A distance of at least 200 feet or a minimum setback of the underlying zoning district, whichever is greater. The minimum setback of this paragraph may be increased at the discretion of the planning board, or, as the case may be for site plan, or it may be decreased in those instances where the owner applicant has submitted plans for a tower design in such a manner as to collapse within a smaller area. And then that such tower design and collapse zone must be acceptable to the town engineer and building inspector. So, of course, this would be subject to them taking a look at what our engineers provided and finding it agreeable.
Anyone else on the board have any questions? Anybody in the audience? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Katie, go ahead.
application number 2. This is a sketch plan. Kip Finley, Indus Companies, 1 Corporate Place, 1170 Pittsford Victor Road, Pittsford, New York, 14534, requests an informal discussion with the board regarding the construction of a 70 to 75 room, 6-story hotel on 3.2 plus or minus acres located at 950 Panorama Trail, to be known as 950 Panorama Trail. The property is now or formerly owned by RDG Incorporated and is zone limited industrial. Application number 13P-0011, SBL number 139.09-1-60.1.
Yep.
Okay, hello everyone. Intermission's over. We're switched. I am Kip Finley with Indus. Jet Meta in the gold tie is with me tonight to answer any questions. Steve Palm, also from Razak Engineering, is here, and Daryl Martin, our architect, is here. So we've got the whole design team here. Since it's a work session, we want to get your input and see if we can brainstorm a few things. At this point, we did hand out these drawings because those we just received today. And also, you should have a packet where we responded to comments from the PRC, which also have a cross-section, which was a comment that came up, and also a colored site plan. If you don't have any of those, I have more site plan copies. Everybody all set?
I'd like
I'd like a copy.
What's the latest?
Anybody else who just got the
Yeah.
2? 3? We have another taker. Do you need one too? Okay. Basically, we've gone through, submitted our concept of what we would like to do with this property on Panorama Trail. It's a nice site. It has a lot of opportunities for views. It has good traffic. It's very centrally located. We feel it's an ideal place to put a hotel. We're proposing 6-story, 70 to 80 rooms, currently about 75. The image you have here is what we're picturing it will look like, at least as far as the massing, number of floors, and things like that. We're still very early in the design phase. We have internally some brainstorms on which different things we want to do with the building, and we'd like your input also. Don't know, as far as Mr. Chairman, if you want us to actually go through responses to the big comments, how would
Yeah,
you
if
like
you
me
would.
to proceed?
If you would.
Okay. All right, on these, some pretty constructive comments. The first one, there is a cross-section in your packet that explains that. When we're working anywhere in a beautiful area that has parks, and you want to be sensitive to the views of the property as well as our views of what we can see from the property. That drawing, for anybody that's in the public, I'm sorry, we don't have this large scale, but the point is, there's a park down, is it Philbrook Park? Now, it was
Philbrook
renamed.
Park.
Then there's a steep bank of woods, and then our site and Panorama Trail. So we're basically just looking at sight lines to see if a tall building would be disruptive or out of place, looking from the park up the hill. My friend Steve here came up with this. Basically, from out in the park, you're generally going to be looking at trees. There's a pretty healthy stand of trees up the entire bank. And although you will probably see the building, at least the top floor or two, one of the things is our building is in the site, not out at the bank. 2 floors are below grade in the back. So even looking at the crest of the hill, you really only see the top floor. So I think that gives you the information that you need to be able to assess that. With regard to setbacks, question 2, question 4 are really a similar thing. As far as setbacks to the property, which is the golf course driving range, that's residential. There's a 150-foot setback there. And if that were observed or held, really there's not much that could be developed on this property because it pretty much takes up the whole property. I think the intent of that, from back when I was doing our comprehensive plan in my town and on our planning board, was to at least give some opportunity for municipal review if something went in the golf course where a commercial property could be not compatible to something in residential. In this case, I think we'll pretty confidently go to the zoning board and request a variance for the setback to put our building within the 150 feet, and also, as far as a buffer, also not have a buffer, because right now the golf driving range is not something that I think would be affected adversely by a hotel. In fact, we actually think it would be fun to have a golf cart or something where people could go over to the golf course and drive balls. I mean, we're surrounded by golf courses. We're toying with the idea of putting some golf theme in the building. As far as number 3, geotechnical, we do have a firm on board. Tonight's kind of our go, no-go night, at least as far as making decisions. We have the architect and the site engineers on board, but before we go for geotechnical and drilling and archaeologists and all these other things, we wanted to get input from the board. But the first visit to the site, the geotech engineer said there should be no problem with the site. He and I have worked together before in East Rochester on the same banks of the same creek. So we're pretty confident everything will be okay, but we are going to be going through that process. Jumping down to 5, 6, parking, handicap spaces, sidewalks, we understand. Those are all good concerns. At this point, it's such a sketch, literally, that we don't probably have all of that taken into account, but we will. Site distance for the front area is poorly located. What they're talking about, I believe, if we go by the bubble system, you've got a good system of having your comments. There's no way to be ambiguous. You got the bubble and what it says. I believe we're talking about when you pull in here or driving down here, this little spur that serves as the front entrance in the porte cochere, I believe they're talking about there. That's actually, looking at it in plan view and looking at aerial photographs don't really quite give you all the information that you need to be able to see why we've selected that. The existing grade coming in is fairly steep. That's another comment on here, number 8. In order to have this come in and service the first floor of the building, we needed to have this little cutoff spur pretty close to where you come in. As soon as you climb, you're up to the 2nd floor, and this is actually the 3rd floor of the building on here. In your packet, there's a very good section of that. It's the one that's labeled A5. It's probably the last one in your set. The porte cochere's on the first floor with the lobby. We have guest rooms on the second floor and up. The parking lot in the back is at the third floor level. If anybody's walked that site, you can see that it really climbs. So there'll be a rear vestibule coming in, but we need to have this driveway spur pretty close to Panorama Trail. Otherwise, we're up a floor too high, and it would be quite a steep dive to come down to it. There's, excuse me, there's plenty of room for refinements in this as we go through the design process and actually have a field survey done. This was all done off USGS maps and walking the site. The comment 8 about Panorama Trail is we realize it's steep and there may be a little room for improvement, but we're trying to work with a site that is already there. And of any place, that is the best place on the property to have the driveway. It only gets steeper if we head towards the expressway. Stormwater control. In this site, we are very highly expecting there to be sandy soils, which are very good for infiltration. And that's why, at a glance, looking at this, you have this little puddle that's our stormwater facility. If it was a normal situation where you have clay soils, this would be 4 or 5 times the size. So at a glance, it does look inadequate. We plan to be doing infiltration on the site, so it will be designed according to DEC standards for that. And also, the geotech engineer is very familiar with this whole area, and all of the hills and drumlins along here we expect to be quite sandy. Sidewalks to Panorama Trail, we want that. We want people to be able to walk down the hill to the other businesses. As far as number 11, authorizing Visit and Dodge to use our land. If people haven't noticed, there's a couple cars on their lot creep over. We haven't even really talked about it with them. If we allow it to continue, we'll put it in writing. So that would be fine. The parking, we actually have 89 spaces on this plan. When it was reviewed, I think they found 77, but they must have missed something. So we do have 89 spaces for a 75-room hotel, which is more than 1 per room, so it'll take care of staff and people visiting and that. Comments 13 and 14 about steep slope, lot coverage, and 15 about topography. Those are all things that were also brought up at the Conservation Board. Definitely all very valid things. When we have the field survey done, which we have penciled in for next week, those kind of things will be much easier to identify on the plans. Emergency vehicles, we definitely want them to pull in. We'll double check all the turning templates to make sure, in this case, a hook and ladder is going to need to come in. We're actually going to have to know which fire district and which piece of equipment they have, whether they have a 2-piece or a single body hook and ladder. If we're going to have a 6-story building, we're going to need them to be able to go up 60, 70 feet in a case of an emergency. But Rizak is used to doing that. This isn't our first hotel. We have quite a few. So we're used to doing that. And using retaining walls and landscaping is part of our plan. Hopefully this colored version shows a little bit more that we actually do have a retaining wall here and around here, so, and back here. So this hopefully is a little better than what the reviewers had when we first submitted this. So we also did have comments from the Conservation Board so we could gauge how they were doing, and Steve went to that meeting. And we don't see anything there that seemed to be any kind of a problem. We know we will have to inventory trees, and they recognize that many mature trees are going to be coming down because the hotel's in that hollow, if you will, of where the golf course is. But we're generally keeping all the parking in the same spot, driveway in the same spot. Steep slope that's along Panorama Trail will stay there, vegetated. So we're trying to make the best use of the site. Aside from that, I don't have anything else to really present as information. I think I'd like to have some questions to help us iron through the whole design, some reaction to this project.
Anyone on the board have a question?
I have a question about how you're going to propose to maintain friction
Pretty much the same way they do down at like Bristol Harbor and the ski slopes, and there'll have to be plowing, careful use of de-icing, salts and things, because that's what we're dealing with. There's very hilly terrain in that area. Be very similar to some of the other development along Panorama Trail.
Have you considered maybe milling and putting some pervious pavement in, or?
Not on the slope, no. One of the things that we really hadn't been far enough along in design for Steve to be able to answer much for the Conservation Board, but they did have a comment similar to that. Since we're going to be using infiltration as our stormwater mitigation, I think we will have areas of pervious pavement such as with pavers and things like that. In the upper parking lot, we're going to be wanting to bring the water towards the middle of the parking lot and infiltrating, rather than right now it sheet flows over the banks and erodes, and we don't really want to erode anything more on the slopes that are on either side of the parking lot. So as far as the entire paving for the whole building site being impervious or pervious, we won't be doing that, but we will probably be doing all sorts of areas with brick pavers and getting things to infiltrate.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, the parking lots, especially that rear parking lot, looks like it's built right up to the rear line, and it's wooded in that area. So I'm thinking, how are you going to do that without affecting those trees? And what kind of grading are you going to be doing off the property? Yeah, right.
This way?
No, the farther up, yeah, along
This?
there. Well, the back line. Nope, all the way to there, yep.
There you go.
The parking lot that's there, we're planning to basically take what's there, skim it, regrade it, and pave over the footprint it already has.
So most of that is the existing parking?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have some pictures from during construction to actually see where the limits of the parking lot are. Right now, some of it's grown up just because it hasn't been used in a number of years, but parking lot in this area will be exactly the parking lot it is now. On your drawing, there's a little arc through here. That's the line of the existing drive coming up. So we're going inboard into the site for these parking spaces. And this is grass right now. So we're gonna introduce some parking spaces there to get our count, to be able to support the hotel. We're keeping about a 20 to 30 foot buffer from the fence that's there, which is also about 10 feet in from the bank. So we're planning to be very safely away from the wooded slope.
And that one other area that I think it's fronting on Big Oak driving range, it looks like you're doing some grading right into their property there.
We're gonna have to talk to them about a grading release. It's virtually flush. When you come in, there's quite a steep slope here, and it fades away to where it's pretty much at grade at that point. So even though in my sketching in my head, I drew several contour lines, it's actually probably not even 1 foot of grade difference. But we do have to talk with them.
I'm just curious, with a project this size, what, how many employees are expected per shift? A general, you don't have to be exact, I just.
with a hotel, there's lots of employees in the morning and housekeeping up through lunch. 70 rooms, there could be, depending on how many were used, we could have 3 to 5 to 10 overnight, 1, maybe 2. So altogether, with all the different shifts that we have and staffing, I think we're in the 10 to 15 range, give or take.
One more question. The eating area that, I think I saw an eating area.
We do
Great
have a-
room and breakfast, is that just for the people staying at the hotel? It's not a restaurant in any way? Or is it? Is it, okay.
A restaurant of this caliber has a complimentary breakfast. Some have English muffins and coffee. This will have more of a hot breakfast, but it is for guests. So we don't actually have a restaurant that we would have people just coming in off the street for dinner or lunch.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Anyone? Oh, sorry.
I have one. Lighting for this hotel in the parking lot. What kind of lighting are you thinking about using on this? Because it's gonna be a very visible site.
What we've been doing recently, because basically our job is making people sleep, giving them all the conditions to be able to sleep, we tend to use more what they call pedestrian level lighting. So instead of 30-foot tall poles, they're 10, 12-foot tall poles with downcast lights, so that we're really kind of lighting up the focus areas of where you're walking. We're not going to be floodlighting the parking lot. So we have a similar goal. Municipalities usually like to keep things not glowing at night, and also
Right,
we
yeah.
don't either. Our blinds are only just so good. We have blackout shades, but we can't black out some floodlights, like a car dealership has floodlights.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Anyone in the audience need to comment? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
Close this hearing.
as far as, should we stick around? Will there be other things you'll want to ask of us or other deliberations?
We're going to meet in the back and discuss this,
Okay.
I'm sure, so.
Thanks.